Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be back with you as, by popular demand, the success of the International Women's Day Exceptional Everyday Women series, we were asked to record a few more amazing interviews. And today I am so excited and thrilled to be bringing to you the amazing Joy Detorre. And Joy has a very, very special place in my heart and in my sort of respect bubble, because there are probably a handful of people who have moved me to tears in a presentation or a meeting. One of them was General Colin Powell. And obviously, I'm not interviewing him today. I've got the number one person that I wanted, and that is Joy, who spoke at a senior leadership meeting about her belief in herself, her growing confidence in herself, and inspired absolutely everyone in the room. So Joy, welcome. Tell us a little bit about you in your own words, and then we'll get into the amazing challenge and achievement questions.
Excellent. Well, Harriet, I want you to know that the love and the admiration is absolutely mutual. I think that you know that we've always had a fond connection from the first time that we ever met. And there are very few people that you can actually say there's this instant connection and relationship. And so thank you for always creating a safe, loving, comfortable, compassionate space where I could always be myself. I don't know that there's ever a time that I've been called an exceptional woman, other than today, like your parents. Like, of course, my mother really thought that I was exceptional. So of course you would expect that. But coming from you, I can't tell you, you know how much profound respect I have for you as a person and as a professional. And I will share a story for those of you that don't know about Harriet. It goes back to this conversation today and the importance of bringing love and dignity and unity and respect into every conversation. So as Harriet said, my name is Joy Detorre. I currently work at IBM. I sit in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And of course, that sits under the umbrella of human resources. And when you choose a profession that is a servant leadership role, you have to be really comfortable that you're not in the forefront of what's happening. You really are there to serve others. And Harriet, you have always been that role model to me. I will never forget the first day that we met. And I actually used the word love in a conversation. And you had shared with me at that moment that you were in the process of interviewing people for a role on your team. And you had asked people to write a survey or it was a survey about themselves, like an interview. They were interviewing themselves. And one person, as a part of this discussion that they were having with you and this kind of research thing that they were writing for you, they actually used the word love in their communication to you. And your comment to me was, that's what I was looking for: passion, enthusiasm, commitment, and somebody who wouldn't be afraid to do that. And so they used love in this explanation, and you hired them. And from that moment forward, I knew that we were kindred spirits, because with the whole profession of human resources, I didn't grow up in HR, Harriet. I'm a career changer. And so I knew that if I was going to choose this profession, I don't think it actually chooses your profession. The profession kind of chooses you. I've really loved being a human resources professional. I've been in HR now for 15 years. I've probably had 3 unique rotations in human resources, and most recently sitting inside of diversity and inclusion, which is probably one of the most profound and important places I think we can be to represent humanity today.
Fabulous. What an introduction, Joyce. So tell us a little bit. The whole International Women's Year is around kind of challenges, how we challenge the challenges that we've experienced. So tell us a little bit about a challenge that you've had and you've overcome that will help others who maybe look at you and think, wow, I can't imagine there's anything that would challenge joy. So tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, you know what, Harriet, I think you heard glimpses, you and the senior leaders actually heard glimpses of this story, but I think I'm gonna twist this a little bit because there are elements of the story that I never had the opportunity to share. And I think the first one is the challenge for me, and these are probably familiar words you're hearing from so many women, and that is, will I ever be enough? We've heard words like imposters or imposter syndrome. And for people who are not familiar with it, that's kind of that psychological pattern in our own minds where an individual doubts their skills or their abilities or their accomplishments. And it's one of those things that we kind of internalize. And the biggest worry when you feel like you're being an imposter is, when am I going to be exposed? Who's going to actually discover? Right. And so what we do is we put on masks, depending upon the situation, like what's the mask I'm going to put on today? And we've also heard familiar words like we're going to cover. So I think my biggest challenge is also probably my biggest story. And so I wanted to share part of the story, elements of the story you haven't heard before. So my mother was a college graduate. She was the first in her family to earn a degree that was higher than an 8th grade education. My father was in the military, proudly served in the Air Force. And then when he left, he was a factory worker. And so my mother and father, they grew up in a very humble steel town in Ohio. And shortly after my mother graduated, she was offered a teaching job. She had a degree in education. She was offered a teaching job in Northern Ohio, which was a suburb of Cleveland, where she was a school teacher, Harriet, for 32 years. We lived in a city that was extremely diverse. Nearly 63% of that population identified as either Black or Hispanic. And my mother taught in an inner city school in a very poor neighborhood, and we followed her there every morning. Majority of the students that were in that school were either on free lunch or free breakfast programs. But we were in our element. Like, this was our school, this was our neighborhood. We didn't know anything different. In that situation, in that neighborhood, in that school, I never felt like an imposter. Like, in that neighborhood, I was comfortable. But like every good parent who wants more for their children, that's where my challenge began and where the imposter started to show up.
Mm-hmm. And how did you've described that not being enough so powerfully. How did you overcome that? How were you able to go from that to delivering to one of the greatest senior leadership teams in the world that you thought you were enough?
Yeah, I will tell you, Harriet, I remember the very beginning of that situation, and we were all mic'd up. I really felt like I was on a main stage. My heart was beating out of my chest. But there was one thing that I remembered about being at IBM and actually sitting and looking at all of those senior leaders and deciding to look at all of them as family, because they all felt a whole lot less intimidating when I referred to them as family. And I think this was kind of how I overcame where my parents really wanted us to advance out of our current experience. And I think it's kind of rooted in a genuine belief. And sometimes, no matter what's happening to you, they're genuine core beliefs that you never abandon. And so I genuinely believe that we all have the ability to do something that is historically important, socially significant, and deeply personal. And so this conversation about overcoming something, this is the part that's deeply personal for me. So my parents were both huge proponents of education. My mother and my father would regularly say, if you want to do something with yourself, if you want to get out of this neighborhood, get an education. There was never a doubt in their mind that we would all get summer jobs, we would apply for student loans, and we would go off to college. Now, I was the baby and I was the only girl. So I have two older brothers. But what we discovered as adult children was that after my mother passed away, we were not the only kids that she had. So there we were at her funeral. I mean, hundreds of kids that literally were snaking that funeral area during her wake to tell us unique and individual and special stories about my mother. I mean, there were 3 generations that were sitting there many times. And this is what they said. This is what we discovered. I mean, we had to literally walk away from my father and say, Are we all hearing the same thing? And this is what my mother said. That story that we thought was reserved only for her 3 children, she was sharing with every kid she ever taught. So imagine an average school of 32 to 35 kids every year for 32 years. And she would always say the same thing. Do you want to get out of this neighborhood? Do you want to make something of yourself? Get an education. And so we realized very quickly that it was not only the 3 children whose lives she impacted, but hundreds of kids over 32 years. And here's kind of the challenge. I guess I must have spent one too many afternoons in the principal's office, Harriet. I mean, I wasn't a bad kid. I was probably just an ornery kid. And I will say that my mother and my brothers would love this story. My mother often threatened me with charm school. And so one day, I actually overheard my mother talking to my self-proclaimed atheist grandfather. I don't actually think that he was an atheist because he wasn't, but yeah, he would self-proclaim it in front of us. But what I heard her say one time was, why is it I have 2 older boys and they would walk 100 miles from a fight, but why my baby and my only girl? Why would she walk 100 miles to get into a fight? And it was very natural for us, Harriet. I mean, we learned how to make knives out of ballpoint pens. We learned how to fist fight. My parents sent us to judo school. I mean, as children, it never really dawned on us that maybe one day we would need to defend ourselves, right? It was just the natural way of how we were behaving in our neighborhood. And so when my mother called my atheist grandfather and I overheard this conversation, I overheard my mother say, will you please bus these children out of the neighborhood? There was a Catholic school down the street where we would have to get on a bus and get there. But for my mother and for my father, they must have really felt, they must have seen something that I didn't see. That ornery streak that was there as a young girl, they must have really thought I was going to start making bad choices. So like every good parent, they felt they needed to intervene. And so my grandfather paid for all of us to be bused to the Catholic school. This, Harriet, is where the imposter began. Because here I'm going from this neighborhood diverse school, bust out of the neighborhood that feels uncomfortable, unfamiliar, and it doesn't look anything like my neighborhood. This is where we had uniforms and pressed shirts and, little patches on our vests, and you had to wear plain colored socks. Like all of this was so foreign to me. And what I was realizing was my school experience and my home experiences were feeling very different. I realized when I was on that bus, when I walked off that bus, it was unique and it was special and it was foreign and I didn't know how to behave there. And so here came the imposter. Like I needed to prove, like every other kid that was there, I had the right to earn the exact same education that they were earning. And so the mask came on. The imposter was revealed. And then I got back on that bus. I walked down the stairs and the uniform came off, the play clothes came on, and I played in the neighborhood. So there was always this balance between what was I experiencing in school and what was I experiencing when I came home. So there was always this nagging feeling to make my parents proud. And I would say ever since they have both passed away, I'm even more determined. That's even more important to me. And I have to admit, I'm happy to report that all 3 of their children graduated from college. They have 5 grandchildren that at the end of May, all of them will have graduated from college. But here is the link to the most important challenge that I had and how I overcame it to the greatest accomplishment. I'll never forget Harriet, like I said, I didn't grow up in HR. I was a career changer. And so I thought if I wanted to be successful in human resources, I better go to school because that's not my degree. And so as a part of a career conversation, my managers were super supportive and I went back to school. I got my master's in international human resources management. And every Saturday I would call my parents. And on the last Saturday of my last day of class, I remember my mother saying these prophetic words to me. Joy, your master's degree, it really wasn't that long and it really wasn't that hard. I think you should keep on going to school and earn your doctorate degree. Well, after I almost crashed my car from what my mother was saying, I realized that she had two boys. And my reaction to her at that moment was I'd studied enough, I'd written enough, I had read enough. You better look at your two boys if you want a Dr. Detorre in the house, right? And so that was kind of the start of how I overcame through education, the challenges and putting the mask on, putting the mask off, covering.
And I understand that you're soon going to have that doctorate. Is that right?
Yes, yes. So here's that greatest accomplishment, I think, Harriet, that I would love for us to celebrate together. I am literally 8 months from earning my doctorate degree from Vanderbilt University. And earning that doctorate degree at Vanderbilt University not only represents, I think, that kind of prophetic image that was in my mother's mind, but I wanted to be a part of a school that was committed to things like diversity, inclusion, community, and belonging, which is exactly how I spend my days. And you and I have talked about this right at the beginning of this conversation. We are experiencing a time of unprecedented need for things like compassion, kindness, justice, dignity, unity, and love.
Absolutely.
And so,
I mean, it's amazing. Your words and the way that you tell a story, I think, Joy, is one of your absolutely greatest strengths. And that achievement, this journey of education, you beautifully describe. And just with all of that, is there a piece of advice that you would give to the thousands of people that will watch this video and be inspired by you, just to close out our section here?
Absolutely, Harriet. I would say where I earned my degree was as significant and important to me as the degree itself. I would tell every woman and every ally out there that when you want to continue, when you want to advance, don't stop. Don't let artificial barriers or obstacles get in your way. Whatever decisions you make sure that they reflect your beliefs, your values, and your character. And what I believe is we should all see our work as an opportunity to do things like transform the culture wherever you are, help evolve your teams, create a workplace where employees can feel safe, be productive, where they can grow and where they can thrive. And although I look forward to becoming Dr. Detorre and gravitating towards my passion of teaching, learning, and changing lives, I don't want anyone out there to feel as though they can't do it. You can. The words that you put in your mind, your own belief systems, I'm a big believer that if you can believe it, you can see it, you can envision it, set your goals, and you can make it happen. Surround yourself with supportive people who love you and want to see you grow.
That is amazing. I think your mom, not only would she be immensely proud, but I think she got the measure of you pretty early on, which is why she called you Joy, because that's what you bring to everyone and everything you do. So congratulations. Thank you for sharing so openly and so beautifully. And we'll talk again very soon.